Hey guys, tonight we begin with the one thing nobody ever thinks to ask about the Vikings. What they actually did with their horses. We're talking late 9th century Scandinavia, a world of longhouses and longships, and men who had been raiding the coasts of England and Francia for over a century, men who had terrorized half of Europe from Ireland to the Volga and sailed to the edges of the known world on ships that, as we will discuss tonight, had absolutely no room for a horse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, let's set the scene. It is the year 865. The Vikings have been at this for about 80 years at this point. The raid on Lindisfarne, which historians tend to mark as the opening act, happened in 793. And in the decades since then, the Scandinavians have figured out that England, Francia, Ireland, and assorted other locations are not only extremely wealthy, but also extremely bad at defending their coastlines. This is useful information if you have longships, which they do. Here is what you probably think you know about Vikings. Big guys, axes, longships, general chaos, a sort of performative wildness that the movies have been enthusiastically reproducing for decades. And somewhere in that image, probably if you think about it, there are horses, because of course there are. It is the early medieval period, everybody has horses, and the Vikings are raiding for 300 years through some of the most horse-rich territory in Europe. England has horses. Francia has horses. The Franks specifically have built their entire military identity around heavy cavalry. Here is the thing. The Vikings never used horses in battle. Not once. In any primary source, in any chronicle, in any saga, will you find a Viking raider mounting a horse and fighting from it. They used horses to get to the battlefield, and then they got off, formed a shield, wall, and fought on foot exactly as their grandfathers had. 300 years of raiding the most cavalry-obsessed civilization in Europe, and the collective Viking response to mounted combat was, we've seen it, we understand it, and no. The even stranger part, they built enormous defensive earthworks, the Danwork specifically, running across the base of the Jutland Peninsula, that were explicitly designed in the shape of Caesar's anti-cavalry fortifications at Alesia. The Danes studied Roman anti-cavalry engineering and applied it to their own national defense, against cavalry that they themselves refused to use. This is either very principled military thinking or the most elaborate piece of selective stubbornness in the history of European warfare. Tonight, we are going to find out which. We are going to spend the next 2 hours in the body of a Danish warrior in the Jarl's retinue, walking through the days and logistics and choices that explain why the most feared raiders in medieval Europe conquered half a continent on horses they stole from the people they were raiding, fought every battle on foot, and built their walls to stop the thing they had decided, collectively, was not for them. Congratulations, you have just woken up in coastal Denmark in the autumn of the year 865. The good news, you own a horse. The bad news, that horse costs more than everything else you own combined. It eats before you do, and it will never once carry you into battle. You wake up in the dark. Not the soft, negotiable dark of a room where curtains and streetlights are doing their respective jobs. You wake up in the actual dark, the unmediated dark of a building with no windows worth the name, and no light source of any kind, except the fire, which has been banked down to coals since midnight and is offering you a faint orange glow from 20 feet away, and not much else. Your nose is the first part of you to fully commit to consciousness, and your nose is currently processing a layered smell that requires a moment to decompose into its components. Wood smoke, which is the base note underneath everything in your life, and which you stopped consciously noticing years ago, except when it intensifies. The residue of last night's meal, which involved saltfish and something involving onions that did not fully resolve before sleep. The collective biological output of approximately 40 people, and several dogs sharing a building that has been sealed against the October air since sundown, with the thoroughness of a structure that has decided heat retention is the primary architectural value. And underneath all of it, faint but present through the wall at the far end, the horses. You know the horses are there before you know anything else about the morning. Your body is conducting its inventory before your mind has agreed to participate. Your left shoulder reports first. It always reports first, which is the shoulder you slept on because the sleeping bench tilts slightly in that direction, and you have not yet been moved to address this. Your feet are cold in the specific way that feet are cold when they have been inside wool wrappings inside a fur, covering inside a sealed building all night, and are still cold, which is a data point your body files under the general heading of winter. Is coming and adds to the running calculation it has been performing since mid-October. The bench you slept on is a wooden platform roughly 1.5 feet wide, which is not very wide. And your body has been negotiating with this geometry for 7 hours, and your body has opinions. Around you the longhouse is beginning to surface from its night state. The shift of a man turning over 3 benches to your left, the low practical conversation of the women near the fire end, who wake first every morning, and are already dealing with the fact of 40 people needing warmth and food, in that order. You can see your breath, faintly, in the coal glow. You become, by degrees, a person who is going to stand up. Here is something worth understanding about the longhouse you are in right now, because it is easy to picture it as a large primitive barn, and that picture is wrong in some important ways. The longhouse was not a house with a barn attached to it. It was a single integrated thermal system that deliberately put humans, animals, and fire in one structure, because that arrangement produced more warmth per unit of fuel than any alternative available in 9th century Scandinavia. The animals at one end generated body heat. The fire in the center distributed that heat through the length of the building. The humans at the other end benefited from both, and the whole structure was sealed tightly enough that this arrangement actually worked, which is why people built them this way for centuries across northern Europe. The one you are currently in is approximately 30 meters long and about 8 meters wide at its broadest point. It houses 40 people across several family and service groupings, plus the dogs, plus some chickens in a corner near the stable end, plus some storage, plus the benches that serve as beds at night, and seating during the day. The horses are in a separate structure outside because the social calculus of 9th century Denmark has concluded that horses occupy a different category from pigs, and that category requires its own building. This distinction will matter. The horses get a building. The 40 people share one. You sit up, which involves a negotiation between your intention and your shoulder's objection, and you put your feet on the floor, which is packed earth covered in rushes that have been down long enough to have developed their own ambient smell. The floor is cold through your leather soles before you have fully stood up. You pull your outer tunic on over your inner one, which you slept in, because sleeping in your underlayers is a basic efficiency that your household has not had the margin to improve upon. And because the distinction between sleeping clothes and daytime clothes is not a luxury the current budget sustains. Your belt goes on. Your knife goes on your belt, because your knife is always on your belt. Has been since you were 12, will be until you are in a condition that no longer requires a knife. The fire at the center of the building is being rebuilt by 2 of the household women, and the smoke from it is moving mostly toward the smoke holes in the roof ridge, and partly toward your face. And your eyes register this as a familiar irritant your body has developed tolerance for but not immunity to. You navigate between the sleeping forms of the men who are not yet up. You can name all of them without looking. You have been living with most of them for years, and make your way toward the door at the stable end, past the smell of the chickens, toward the cold and the horses. The stable is 10 steps from the longhouse door, and those 10 steps are the most committed 10 steps of your morning. October in coastal Denmark does not offer you a gentle transition between inside and outside. It offers you outside, fully immediately, with both hands. Your breath comes out in a visible cloud, and the wind takes it south. The stable latch is cold iron under your fingers, and you lift it and pull the door open, and the smell that comes out to meet you is the smell of horse. Warm, large, specific. A smell your body has processed every morning of your adult life, and that now registers as warm present, requiring attention. Your horse is a bay gelding of about 12 hands, acquired 3 years ago at a price your family spent the better part of a winter deciding it could afford, and it looks at you from its stall with the expression horses make when they have been awake for a while, and have been thinking about the grain situation, and have developed views about the timeline for its resolution. Your horse's views on the grain timeline are not unreasonable. You are going to fill its trough before you eat your own breakfast. This is not sentimentality. This is the operational logic of an asset that represents more capital than anything else your household currently owns, and you protect your assets. Now is a good time to talk about what a horse actually costs in 9th century Scandinavia, because the number puts everything else in perspective. A good working horse in Viking Age Denmark was worth approximately 6 to 8 cows, and in an agricultural economy, where the cow is the standard unit of medium value wealth, that is a number that requires a moment to settle. Cows gave milk, butter, cheese, more cows, and eventually meat and hide. A horse gave you transport, haulage, and status. In death it could be eaten, which we will get to later in a different context entirely. What a horse primarily gave you, though, was the signal that you were the kind of person who owned a horse. And in the social world of the Jarl's retinue, where a warrior's standing was calculated from his equipment, his oath, and the quality of the assets behind both, that signal mattered in concrete ways. The men who went raiding with the Jarl and who owned horses were not the wealthiest men in Denmark. They were not Jarls, they did not own ships. But they were a specific tier of warrior above the men who came to the muster on foot. The horse marked you as someone whose household had been accumulating capital long enough to invest in something this expensive and this fragile. Horses could go lame. Horses could die of cold. Horses ate grain through a Scandinavian winter in quantities that required planning every year, starting in August. You measure the grain from the storage bin at the back of the stable, barley and oats. The proportion already tilted toward barley, because the oats ran short 2 weeks ago, and you have not yet decided what to do about this. Your hands feel the weight in the wooden scoop, and your body does the arithmetic automatically. The arithmetic of someone who has been managing finite resources through multiple winters, and has internalized the math, without needing to consciously perform it. The horse takes the grain with the focused professional attention of an animal that treats eating as a primary obligation. You stand beside it while it eats, one hand on its neck, because a horse that is comfortable with your hands is a horse that will do what you need when the situation requires it. And the difference between a horse that trusts you and one that doesn't is a difference you have seen play out badly for other men. The stable is warmer than outside. You can feel that clearly, but it is not warm. Your breath is still visible in here, just less dramatically than in the open air. Outside the stable wall, you can hear the settlement beginning its morning, the sounds of other households going through the same sequence you are going through: fire and animals and water and food. In roughly that order, the same order every morning, the order imposed by the physics of staying alive in October in Scandinavia. You come out of the stable into grey morning light. Not stormy, not threatening, just committed to overcast as a baseline condition. The sky and the sea operating at matching tones of grey. Green, the horizon between them, requiring attention to locate. Your settlement sits on a low ridge above the inlet, and this view is your view every morning. The fjord running southeast, the birch and pine on the far bank, losing their argument with the season in orange and brown, the water in the sheltered inlet, moving with the particular oil, flat stillness of a windless morning. 3 other households are visible from where you stand, all of them showing wood smoke from their roof vents, all of them in the same sequence. The smell of your own smoke mixes with the cold mineral smell of the water below, and the smell of the stable at your back, and the smell of your own breath. Your feet have graduated from cold to the committed cold that will be with you for most of the day. Your shoulder is maintaining its complaint at a professional sustained level. You are standing in coastal Denmark in the autumn of 865. You have fed your horse, and you have not yet eaten. And this is the correct order of operations, and you go back inside. The social world that organizes your morning and everything else about your life runs on a set of hierarchies that are clear in their broad structure and complicated in their daily details. At the top is the king, though in this period in Scandinavia, king means something closer to the most powerful Jarl who has successfully convinced or coerced the other Jarls into acknowledging primacy, which is a condition that requires ongoing maintenance and occasionally renegotiation. Below the king are the Jarls, regional lords whose authority is a continuous function of how many fighting men they can muster, how many ships they own, and how recently they have produced results that justify the loyalty of the men below them. Below the Jarls are the retinue warriors, the herd, the household fighters, the men who have sworn themselves to a Jarl's service in exchange for equipment, a share of raid proceeds, food from the Jarl's table, and the standing that comes with being a professional warrior in a culture that has organized a significant amount of its social prestige around that identity. You are one of those men. You own your horse, your sword, your shield, your padded armor. You owe the Jarl your sword in the raiding season, and your presence when called. He owes you a cut of what the raids produce, a place at his table, and the social weight of his name, in a world where whose man you are determines a great deal about how the world treats you. You duck back through the longhouse door, and the comparative warmth of the interior takes you back in. The fire is properly established now, the smoke going more or less where it is supposed to, and there is a pot on. And the morning is moving in the direction of food, which your body has been tracking since the moment you got up. Your morning meal will be porridge, barley porridge, thick, salted, possibly with some butter if the household supplies are in a cooperative state. You take your place on the bench, and you eat without ceremony, because ceremony belongs to the evening meal, when there is enough food and enough firelight to make it worth the effort. And the morning is a straightforward transaction between your body and what it requires to function. Your bowl is wooden, your spoon is wooden, your cup holds water because the ale is for later. You can hear your horse in the stable from here, not distressed, just present, working through the grain you put in front of it 10 minutes ago. You finish your food and you sit for a moment with your cup, looking at the fire, thinking about the day, which involves equipment maintenance, a contribution to the ongoing wood supply, and the conversation that has been developing in the Giles Hall for the past 3 weeks about the spring, and the ships, and England. The arithmetic of the horse's winter feed is already in the back of your mind, running quietly. February is a long way from now, and also not that far from now, and you have an expensive animal to keep alive through it. And in the spring, if everything goes as planned, you are going to need it to carry you to the beach, so you can get on a ship and go steal someone else's. The stable again, you are back in it, because the morning is not done with the horse, even though the horse is done with its grain. You take down the grooming brush from the hook beside the harness peg, and you begin at the neck, working toward the hindquarters in the long, firm strokes your hands have learned to make without your full attention needing to be present for them. Your horse stands for this, which is not a guarantee. Horses have opinions about grooming that vary by mood and by the temperature of the hands doing the grooming and by factors that are not available to human analysis. But yours stands, and you register this as a small professional success in an ongoing negotiation that requires daily maintenance to stay functional. Your hands find the areas along the back where the winter coat is coming in thick, the slight roughness at the withers where summer has not fully given way yet, the reassuring solidity of the animal under your palms that tells you it ate well and slept adequately and is not presenting any of the subtle preliminary signs that a horse presents before something goes wrong. You know what those signs feel like. You have been looking for them every morning for 3 years, and you have found them twice, and both times the finding was the thing that allowed you to address the problem before it became a different, more expensive problem. The stall needs to be mucked out. This is the part of horse ownership that the poems do not address at length, and there are poems about horses. Good ones, many of them, because horses are genuinely magnificent animals, and the people who have them tend to feel this strongly and want to record it. But the poems are not heavy on the section where you load the fork with wet straw and manure and carry it to the midden heap in 2 trips, because 1 trip is more than the fork handles, and you learn this in the 2nd week and have not repeated the lessons since. Your arms feel the weight. Your nose is processing the full informational content of a space that housed 1 large animal overnight in a sealed building, which is a substantial amount of information to process before you have fully committed to the day. Your boots pick up the material that boots pick up in a stable yard, and will carry it with them until you think to do something about it, which will be later and not now. You work through this the way you work through most physical tasks that have no interesting properties, except the requirement to be completed, steadily without commentary, getting from one end of the job to the other. Here is the number the saggers leave out, the ongoing cost. You already know the purchase price, 6 to 8 cows, depending on the animal, the region, and the year. And that is the figure that gets discussed, because it is the figure that is discussed at the time of purchase, the one-time dramatic transaction that people are present for. The number that does not get discussed in the same breath is the number that runs every month, every year, for as long as the horse is alive and working. The grain through winter, October to April, roughly the months when there is no pasture, and the animal must be fed from storage, amounts to a quantity that historians of Viking age agriculture estimate at approximately what a person would eat in the same period. Your horse consumes a person's winter food supply each year, and this food must be grown, harvested, stored, and rationed with the same care you give to rationing your household's own food, because the 2 supplies are drawing from the same fields. Beyond the grain, the hay, the stable bedding, the hoof maintenance, the harness repair, The occasional consultation of whoever in your community has enough knowledge of horse medicine to be worth consulting when the animal starts doing something you have not seen it do before. Add the labour, the daily hours, yours, that go into feeding and grooming and mucking and inspecting and all the small ongoing attentions that keep a horse healthy. And the real cost of owning this animal is considerably larger than the purchase figure suggests. After the stall, the harness. You carry it to the bench near the stable door where the light comes in better, and you go through it piece by piece, the way you go through it every few days in the cold months, when the leather is most vulnerable. Your fingers find the places where it has stiffened in the overnight cold, the slight cracking at the bend points. That means the treatment is not keeping up with the stress. The stitching at the collar that has been loosening since September, and that you have been tightening incrementally each time you check it. Your thumb presses the leather at the stress points. Not hard, just enough to test the give, to feel whether it flexes, or whether it has the dry brittleness. That means it is past the point where treatment helps, and is approaching the point where it needs replacing. You have a small pot of rendered fat for this, which is what you use because it is what you have, and because it works. And you apply it to the places that need it with the cloth your household keeps specifically for this purpose. A failed harness is a specific kind of problem. Not the catastrophic kind. Harnesses fail gradually, usually, and give warning. But the kind that cascades because a horse that slips its collar unexpectedly is a horse you are no longer in communication with, and the conversation is much harder to restart quickly when you are not in the stable yard. Your horse comes to the half door of its stall while you work on the harness, because it has registered your presence in the stable and has formed an expectation about what your presence implies. And the expectation is that your presence implies an interaction, and the interaction should involve it rather than the harness. You reach over without looking and let it push its muzzle into your palm, which is what it does when it wants confirmation that you are paying attention, and you are paying attention even if you are paying it sideways, and it settles. The relationship you have with this animal is 3 years old. It is not friendship in the sense the word applies between people, but it is a relationship with genuine content, built from daily contact, daily small negotiations, the accumulated record of what you have asked of each other, and how those requests resolved. You know this horse. You know the sound it makes when it is comfortable, and the sound it makes when something is wrong, and the difference between those two sounds is available to you, without needing to think about it, which is one of the things that 3 years of daily proximity produces that is actually worth something in practical terms. A horse you do not know is a horse whose signals you are reading cold, and reading cold is slower and more likely to be wrong. The question that presents itself if you spend long enough in this stable doing this work is the question of proportion. The horse costs more than anything else your household owns. The horse eats a person's food supply each winter. The horse takes the first hours of your morning every morning of the year, including the mornings when you are sick and the mornings when it is cold enough that your hands do not close properly until you have been at work for 20 minutes. And the horse will not go to battle with you. This last fact is not something your culture treats as a problem requiring explanation, but it is worth sitting with for a moment from the outside. In Francia, the warriors who own horses at this level of investment are the knights, the heavy cavalry, the men for whom the horse and the mounted charge are the entire point of the horse. In England, the Thagnans ride to battle and sometimes fight from horseback. In Scandinavia, the retinue warrior owns a horse, maintains a horse, depends on a horse for his professional mobility and his social signalling, and then gets off the horse at the edge of the battlefield and fights in the shield, while on foot. The horse is the vehicle. It is not the weapon. It is never the weapon. By mid-morning there are 2 other men in the stable yard, retinue warriors from the same household, both running through the same maintenance sequence you have been running through since breakfast. The conversation that moves between you is the conversation of men who are doing familiar physical work and talking between tasks, rather than dedicating attention to either. The state of the wood supply, which is a concern, the condition of Bjarne's horse, which has been moving oddly on its left foreleg for 4 days and which Bjarne is watching, with the specific watchful expression of a man who is hoping to watch the problem away, rather than confront it. And the topic that has been in the background of every conversation in the Jarl's Hall for 3 weeks now. England. The specific quality of the talk has changed recently. It has moved from the conditional tone that raiding plans exist in through most of the year to the logistical tone. The tone that involves discussions of ships and tides and coastal access, and how many men, and what the provision situation looks like for a crossing in April. Your horse shifts its weight in a stall, You put a hand on its shoulder without thinking about it, and it stills. The other men's horses are doing the same thing the horses do when there are people around doing purposeful things. Watching, waiting, assessing. Back in the longhouse with the stable work done, you take your sword from its place and settle into the work of the edge. The whetstone comes out of the pouch on your belt. You carry it the way you carry your knife, always. And you draw the blade and check it in the grey light from the smoke hole, tilting it to find the angle that shows you the edge rather than the flat. Your eyes look for the places where the steel has turned, the small irregularities that build up from use, and that turn into larger irregularities, if not addressed consistently. Your hands know the angle and the pressure the whetstone requires, and they apply both without your conscious direction, which is what happens when you have been doing something long enough that the skill moves out of the part of your mind that has to think about it and into the part that simply does it. Your shield is against the wall, and after the sword you will check the iron boss for the rust that the October damp has been working at since you last treated it, and after that the gambeson and the shoulder stitching that has been threatening since August. The maintenance of the equipment package is not a dramatic activity, it is a daily activity. It is the activity that occupies the hours between the activities that the songs are about. The complete equipment package of a Viking Age retinue warrior: sword, helmet, if you were prosperous enough, mail or padded armour, and the horse, represented a capital investment that historians have estimated across a range of sources at somewhere between 20 and 40 cows in total, depending on quality and decade and region. This was not a figure that a single generation assembled from nothing. It was inherited and accumulated over time, the sword perhaps the most inherited piece, being the most expensive and the most durable, a good blade potentially passing through 3 or 4 hands across a century before it wore out or was lost in the circumstances that swords are lost in. The horse, by contrast, had a working life of 15 to 20 years at most, which meant that every warrior who stayed in the profession long enough would face the expensive, logistically complex task of horse replacement at least once, possibly twice. Finding the right animal, negotiating the price, beginning the years of daily relationship, building that converted a purchased horse into a functional working partner. This was a known disruption in the career of a retinue warrior, and the men who had been through it had opinions about when to start looking and what to look for, and how long the transition actually took in practice. The second feeding is in the early dark, because October in Denmark ends its light early and without consultation. You are back in the stable with the grain scoop, and the stable smells like warm horse and old hay and the leather treatment you applied this morning. And your horse is at the trough before you have finished pouring, because it learned the sound of the scoop sometime in its first week in your stable, and has not forgotten it. Your hands measure the grain with the arithmetic that has become automatic. What is in the bin? What remains of the winter? What comes between now and the muster in April? And you pour it, and you listen to the horse eat in the gathering dark, and you lean against the stall door for a moment with no particular task in front of you, which does not happen often. Your shoulder is the same shoulder it was this morning. The stable is warm compared to outside, and you stay in the warmth for a moment longer than the task requires. Tomorrow you will do this again. The day after, the same. Your horse eats. The dark outside the stable door is complete now. The kind of complete dark that arrives in October and does not leave until March. And you are going to go inside and eat your own meal, and sleep, and wake up and come back out here, and do this again, and again, until April, when the Jarl calls the muster, and you ride to the beach and leave this horse behind, and get on a ship. And the horse will stand at the beach and watch you go, eating someone else's grass, waiting for someone to come back, who may or may not be you. The training happens in the field behind the settlement. The flat one, the cleared one, the one that serves as the gathering point for everything requiring more space than the longhouse allows. You arrive in the early afternoon with your shield and your spear, and 5 men from the retinue are already there. Gunnar, who is the oldest, and who has trained long enough that his movements have been simplified down to what they actually are, rather than what a younger man imagines them to be. Eric and his brother, and 2 men from the eastern farms who come in consistently, but came today, which is either general commitment or the England talk making everyone more conscious of the gap between their current readiness and whatever April will require. The field is the cold grey of late October grass that has stopped growing and started going brown at the edges. Your breath and the breath of the men around you makes a small collective cloud above the group. You settle the shield on your arm and feel the weight of it make its familiar claim on the muscles of your shoulder, which have been making their own claims on your attention since this morning, and are now going to be asked to set those claims aside for the afternoon. The drill begins with the wall. You lock your shield to gunners on your left, and to Eric's on your right, overlapping the rims in the specific configuration that turns 5 individual shields into one continuous surface. And you feel the weight change as you do. Your shield alone is a manageable load, one your arm has adapted to over years. But your shield as part of the wall is a different weight. The weight of something that must be held at a constant height and angle, regardless of what is happening on the other side of it. Gunner calls the advance and you step together, and the step together is the point. Not stepping forward, but stepping forward simultaneously. At the same pace, so the wall moves as a wall, rather than as 5 individuals who happen to be adjacent to each other. Your knees are slightly bent, your weight is forward, your grip on the shield boss is the grip for the wall, rather than the grip for the individual fight. And your body applies the right one without your having to choose it, which is what years of doing this produces. The field is wet underfoot, and your footing is the footing available rather than the footing you would select, and you adjust. The shield, wall, skaldborg in the formal vocabulary, though you think of it simply as the wall because that is what it is, was not an invention of your people specifically. Variations of it had been used across northern Europe for long enough that the logic behind it was not a discovery, so much as a convergent conclusion. A single warrior can be attacked from multiple angles. A line of warriors with overlapping shields can only be attacked from the front, and the front is the angle the warriors are prepared and equipped to receive. The wall concentrates the defensive capability of individuals into a collective system that is considerably more than the sum of its parts. It also concentrates the offensive problem in a specific and useful way. You advance the wall, and the pressure of 60 men moving in a coordinated line is a different kind of pressure from 60 men attacking individually. And it is the kind of pressure that a defending force must either match or yield to. The system's one absolute requirement is coherence. Every man who steps out of the wall, from fear, from opportunism, from the impulse to pursue a retreating enemy before the line has moved with him, creates a gap. A gap is an invitation. In a shield, wall engagement, invitations are accepted quickly, and the consequences last longer than the gap. The wall exercise breaks down into partner drills, which are the part of the afternoon your body will remember tomorrow. You are paired with Gunnar, who is the worst possible partner for this exercise, in the sense that he is the most instructive one. He will not give you anything. He will push until you push back, and when you push back he will adjust and push again, and the adjustments will be the lesson. Your shield comes up. His comes into it with controlled force. Not the full weight impact of actual combat, but enough that your arm registers the load, and your feet register the need to find purchase on the wet grass. You push back. He shifts left, which you have seen him do before, and your feet move to track the shift, and your shield follows your feet, which is the correct sequence. Feet first, shield second, and you maintain the contact. Your shoulder is having a sustained conversation with you about its opinion of this situation. Your shoulder has been in this conversation since this morning, and the partner drill is making the conversation louder. You maintain the contact. Gunnar makes a sound that is neither approval nor criticism, but something between them, which is the sound he makes when the thing you are doing is correct. And he intends to register this fact without making it comfortable. 3 hours into the afternoon. Bjorn breaks the line. It is not a dramatic break. He steps forward, 2 paces in pursuit of a retreating Eric, who is retreating as part of a separate drill, and not because he is actually running, and the 2 paces take Bjorn out of the wall alignment, in a way that would, in a real engagement, leave the man to his right, with an exposed flank. Gunnar stops the drill. He does not shout. He does not produce the elaborate demonstration of failure that a younger instructor might construct. He walks to where Bjorn is standing, points at the gap with one finger, points at the man to Bjorn's right, points at the gap again. Your feet feel the wet cold of the field coming up through your soles while you stand still. Your shield arm is burning in the particular way it burns when you have been using it for 3 hours, and are now being asked to hold it up while also paying attention to something else. Bjorn nods. He knew what he did at the moment he did it. Knowing does not prevent doing, which is the reason the drill exists, which is the reason you are on this cold field every afternoon, until April. Here is the question the afternoon makes obvious if you have been paying attention. What would happen if one of these men were on a horse? The answer presents itself immediately to anyone who has spent time inside a shield wall. A man on horseback is above the wall. He cannot lock his shield to the shields of the men beside him because the elevation difference makes the geometry wrong. He moves at the pace and direction of the horse, rather than the pace and direction of the wall, and the wall's operational logic requires everyone to move at the same pace and direction. And, most critically, a horse is a large animal with its own responses to the noise and pressure and blood smell of a shield wall engagement, responses that may not align with the tactical requirements of the man on its back. The Franks had spent generations developing the specific horses and equipment and training protocols. The high saddle, the stirrup, the destrier bred for precisely this work that allowed mounted warriors to function as coherent weapons. The Vikings raided Frankish territory repeatedly. They saw Frankish cavalry operate. They understood what it was and how it worked. They made a choice. The shield wall was the choice. The shield wall had worked for their fathers, and their fathers and their fathers, and adding horses to it would not have improved it. It would have introduced a variable the system was not designed to accommodate. And systems do not improve by adding variables they cannot accommodate. The session ends when the light makes continuing unreasonable. You lower your shield, and your arm registers, this with a relief that is not subtle. The men around you go through the same sequence. Shields coming down, weight shifting out of the defensive stance, the particular relaxation of a body that has been held in a specific kind of readiness for several hours, and is now being released from that holding. Your breath is visible again in the cooling air. Gunnar walks the field slowly, reading the ground, the flattened grass, the footprints, the marks where the partner drills happened, with the eye of someone who can see the afternoon's events recorded in the surface of the field and is reviewing what it says. He stops at the place where Bjorn broke the line. He looks at it for a moment. He says nothing further about it. The silence is the rest of the lesson, and Bjorn can do with it what he chooses. You have been watching Gunnar operate for 3 years, and this is how he always operates, and you have concluded it is more effective than the alternative, though the alternative is louder and therefore easier to observe in the short term. Before the light is entirely gone, you work the spear. The throwing post at the far end of the field has been there for as long as anyone you have asked can remember. Wood-worn smooth by impacts, leaning slightly toward you because years of throws from this direction have tilted it, and you adjust for the lean automatically. You pace off to the range where a thrown spear is useful, which is not the long arsing cast of the formal sagas, but the shorter, flatter throw of a man closing distance on a target at combat range, and you throw. Your spear goes where you intend 3 times out of 4. The 4th time you retrieve it and try to understand what your arm did differently on the release, which is a question your arm cannot fully answer, and which you will carry into tomorrow's session. Your hands are cold. The spear shaft is cold in your hands. After the spear work, the sword, the cut, and the recovery against the second post, the cut and the recovery, your arm producing the motion and your eyes reading the result, until the light has gone enough that you cannot clearly see the surface you are cutting at. This is the natural stopping point, and you stop. The actual sequence of a Viking battle, reconstructed from the sagas, and from the accounts of people who observed them from the other side of the wall, followed a recognizable pattern across enough engagements to be considered standard rather than situational. It began at range, spears thrown, arrows released if archers were present, rocks if rocks were available, and men were positioned to throw them effectively. The preliminary bombardment was partly about causing casualties, and partly about degrading the composure of the opposing wall before physical contact. A wall whose men were already bleeding and angry when they met your wall was a different proposition from a wall whose men arrived fresh. Then came the close spear work, the initial contact of the 2 formations, spears going over shields and under shields and into the gaps. Then the H-Gigva, the close combat, when the distance was too short for spears and the swords and axes and seekses came into use, and the battle became the specific problem of 2 lines of men trying to force their way through each other at arm's length. The horse was absent from all 3 phases. The horse had brought you to the field. The horse was tied to something at the edge of the field, or picketed in a hollow, or standing in someone's paddock a mile back up the road, doing none of this. Waiting. You walk back across the field in the last grey light, shield on your back, spear in hand, shoulder making its evening report. The route back takes you past the paddock fence and your horse is at the fence. It has been in the paddock for the middle hours of the day, and it is at the fence, watching you come across the field. You do not know how long it has been standing here, or how much of the afternoon it watched. You stop and put your hand on its nose, and it pushes back into your palm. Your arm hurts. Your feet are wet. The field behind you holds the record of the afternoon in its flattened grass and churned mud, and none of that record involves a horse, and none of it will. You will train again tomorrow, and the horse will be in the paddock, and the training will not involve the horse. April will come, and you will ride to the beach and hand the horse to someone, and get on the ship, and the horse will watch the ship from the beach, in the same way it has been watching the training field this afternoon. Attentive, present, uninvolved. And the thing that happens on the other side of the water will be the thing that happens, and none of it will be the horse's problem. The Jarl sends word in the morning, which in practical terms means the Jarl sends his man Holder, who appears at the longhouse door before you have finished the first cup of the day, and delivers the news in the flat way that Holdor delivers everything, which is to say, without visible investment in your reaction to it. There is a muster. 2 weeks from now, the Eastern Farm is providing 6 men, and you are one of them. You should bring your gear in the state that your gear deserves to be in, and if your gear is not in that state, you should do something about that in the next 2 weeks. Haldor does not wait for a reply. Haldor has 6 more stops to make, and the November morning is not getting warmer while he stands in your doorway. He leaves. You sit with the cup and what he said. 2 weeks from now is not very much time if your mail needs work, and your mail needs work. You have been telling yourself it needed work since August, and it still needs work. Outside, because the world has elected to continue operating, normally despite this development, your horse is in the paddock doing what your horse does in the cold morning, which is stand near the fence and breathe visible breath into the grey air, and look at the longhouse with the patient, uninvested attention of an animal that expects nothing particular from the morning, but is willing to observe it anyway. The muster is not a secret. By midday, the 6 farms that provide men to this particular Jarl's retinue have all had the same visit from Holdor, and by the afternoon everyone who will be there, and everyone who lives with someone who will be there, has received the information, and the information has been processed in the various ways that information of this kind gets processed, depending on where you are standing relative to it. The men who are going are assessing equipment, and having conversations about equipment, and in some cases arguing about equipment, because the equipment conversation is the concrete and available version of the conversation nobody is having directly, which is about the spring and the water and the distance and the probability of returning. The women who live with the men who are going are either not speaking about it at all, or speaking about everything, except it, which amounts to the same thing. The children at the farms are repeating the word England to each other, with the weight of a word they have heard. Adults say with significance, not yet knowing what it means beyond the weight. Your mail is on the table. You have a punch and a coil of wire and a small hammer, and you are working through the rings that need replacing, which is slow, repetitive work that your hands can do without your full attention, which means your attention is available for other things. You give it other things. This is not productive, but it is what you do. The Jarl, his name is Sigurd, and he commands the loyalty of 3 coastal farms plus the timber, cutting rights on the ridge that generates a reliable secondary income, and the political relationships that come with it. He's not a remarkable man, in the sense that the sagas will not preserve his name. He is remarkable in the sense that matters for your daily life, which is that he has the organizational competence to transform a collection of armed farmers into a functioning raid party, and the judgment to know which targets are worth crossing the water for, and which ones are not, and the reputation to attract men who have done this before. You have ridden for Sigurd for 3 years. In 3 years you have crossed to the Frisian coast twice and returned both times with more than you left with, which is the relevant benchmark for evaluating employers in your current field. Sigurd takes 1/3. You keep 2/3 minus expenses. The expenses are agreed in advance, itemized in a way that Sigurd's headman Rolf tracks, with a precision that would be impressive in a counting house, and is somewhat unnerving in a man who is also responsible for deciding which of the people you encounter can be taken and which ones should simply be hit until they give you their portable valuables and let you leave. The muster itself happens at the beach, specifically at the inlet on Sigurd's eastern property, where the boat has been wintered over in its shed, and which is close enough to the water that the practical work of launching can begin immediately after the formal work of gathering. You arrive on the appointed morning with your gear on your back, and your spear in hand, and your sword at your belt, and your horse beneath you, because the farm is 6 miles from the beach, and the gear is heavy, and you are not walking 6 miles in November carrying mail and provisions if you have a horse. The horse, your horse, the one from the paddock, the one that has been watching you work through the mail rings all week with the same patient attention it gives to everything, carries you the 6 miles without complaint, because the horse is good at this, which is the thing the horse is good at. When you reach the beach, you will get off. The horse will be handed to your brother's son, who is 12 and not going anywhere, and who will be responsible for getting the horse back to the farm and keeping it through the winter. The horse's career as a military asset ends at the beach. It began at the same place. There is a neatness to this arrangement that the horse has no opinion on. At the beach there are, counting yourself, 63 men. You know approximately 40 of them by name and approximately 20 of those by more than name, which is to say, you know which of them you would want beside you in a specific situation, and which of them you would prefer to have somewhere else in a specific situation. Gunner is here, which you expected. The 2 men from the eastern farms are here, which you did not expect given their consistency in the training drills. Everyone brought their gear, and most of it is in reasonable condition, and a few pieces of it are in condition that suggests the owner either does not take equipment maintenance seriously, or has had a hard year that left no time for it. Sigurd inspects the gear with the inspection style of a man who has been doing this for 15 years and can read a shield's condition in 3 seconds, and a man's readiness in approximately the same time. He does not comment on most of what he sees. His silence about a thing and his comment on a thing are roughly equal in their capacity to produce embarrassment, which is why the men whose gear he passes without comment are not necessarily relieved. The boat is the point of the whole enterprise, and the thing that makes everything else possible, and the thing that simultaneously makes the horse conversation irrelevant and final. It is a longship, a drecker in the vocabulary of men who are trying to sound impressive, though the men actually using it tend to call it the ship or Sigurd's ship, or just the boat, because the people who call things by their formal names are usually the people who are not on them. You know this boat well. You have spent 2 crossings aboard it, which adds up to enough hours at sea to have a detailed understanding of its geometry. The width, which is approximately the length of a tall man lying down, give or take, the depth, which is not much. The way the oar benches run the length of the hull, so that every man aboard is also a propulsion unit when the wind is not cooperating. The relationship between the ship's draft and the shore it is trying to reach, which is that it is specifically designed to have as little draft as possible, so that it can go where other ships cannot, which is directly onto the beach. The horse cannot get on this boat. This is not a philosophical position. This is geometry. The ship is approximately 26 meters long and 4 meters wide, and contains 63 men, and their gear and the provisions for the crossing, and the tools for the campaign. And there is no horse-shaped space, because the horse-shaped space does not exist. The Lidang, the levy system that organized Scandinavian maritime military power, was not an improvisation, and it was not simple. It was a system developed over generations that assigned specific obligations to specific territorial units. Each unit of land was responsible for providing a certain number of men, a certain amount of provisions, and in some formulations, a specific portion of a ship's cost and maintenance. The system's logic was the logic of a society that understood its military advantage lay on the water, not the land, and built its military organization accordingly. The king or jarl who called a Liding was not assembling a land army that happened to have boats. He was assembling a maritime force, men selected and provisioned for a specific kind of operation, organized around the ship as the primary military unit, trained for the fighting that the ship made possible. That fighting happened on beaches and in monasteries and in river valleys and in coastal settlements. And in all of those contexts, the ship got you there and the ship got you out, and the horse was an amenity for the overland approach and departure, and nothing more. The Frankish response to Viking raiding would eventually include the strategic use of bridges to block river access. They figured out that the ship was the point, and that stopping the ship stopped the raid. Nobody built barriers against Viking horses. The provisions are loaded with the efficiency of men who have done this before, which is to say not perfectly but quickly, and the arguments about where things go are the arguments of men who know the geometry of the space, and have opinions about how the geometry should be used, rather than the arguments of men who are uncertain about the geometry. The saltfish goes forward, under the boards. The dried meat goes in the chest that doubles as your rowing bench. The freshwater casks go amidships, where the weight distribution keeps the hull's behaviour predictable. Everyone is doing several things at once, and the things fit together with a coherence that is neither graceful nor accidental, but is instead the result of people having agreed in advance about how the things fit together, and having practiced the agreement enough times that it runs without significant friction. Sigurd is not directing this. Rolf is directing this. Sigurd is standing at the waterline looking east, in the direction of the open water, with the expression of a man taking inventory of a situation that exists and is not yet visible, but that he is already in relationship with. Your horse is at the paddock fence again. It has been at the paddock fence all morning. It watches the loading process with the attention it gives everything, which is complete and without discernible opinion. Your brother's son is holding the horse's reins. He is 12, and he is trying to be someone who is not watching you go, which is the thing a 12-year-old tries to be when someone they depend on is leaving, and it is not completely working. You do not say anything that would make it worse. You put your hand on the horse's nose, the same place you put your hand the last time you stood at the paddock fence after training. The push back into your palm, the same push, the same warmth. You tell the boy to keep the horse on the east field through December and move it to the shelter pasture in January, because the east field gets the wind, and in January the wind is a problem. He nods. He knows this. You told him the same thing last year. You are telling him again because it is easier than the thing you are not saying, which is that you are aware of the arithmetic of departure and you find it inconvenient, and that the horse is the best thing on your farm and you need someone responsible for it. And that 12 is old enough for responsible. If you explain what responsible requires clearly enough and repeat it until it stays. He nods again. The horse breathes into your palm. You take your hand back. You walk to the waterline. You get on the boat. The ship moves away from the shore, with the oars out and working, and the motion of the hull in the water is the motion you remember, the specific way a long ship responds to the sea, which is responsive in a way that a heavier vessel is not. Alive to the water, in a way that is satisfying when the conditions are cooperative, and genuinely terrifying when they are not. The November sea is not cooperative, but it is not yet the January sea, and the difference is navigable. You find your oar position, which is the same position you had on the previous two crossings, because position is one of the things that gets established, and stays established in the logic of a boat where everyone has a job. And the jobs are assigned partly by capability, and partly by who got there first, the first time. The shore recedes. Your farm recedes. The paddock fence recedes. You cannot see the horse from this distance. The horse is a shape near the fence, or a shape that might be the horse, or the fence without the horse, because the boy has already walked it back to the field, which is the right thing to do. You cannot tell. The coast is the coast, and then it is a line, and then it is a suggestion of a line, and then it is the grey of the sky, meeting the grey of the sea at the place where the coast was. Your oar goes in and comes out and goes in. The water is cold, where the spray catches your hands. England is east, which is the direction you are rowing. The first hour is the worst and the best hour, which sounds contradictory and is not. It is the worst because your body is remembering what this is, the cold coming off the water in a specific way that is different from the cold on land. The spray that finds the gap at your collar and runs down the inside of your shirt. The oar's grip, demanding the grip you have and punishing any lapse with a handle that tries to pull through your fingers with the weight of the weight. Water resisting the blade, and it is the best because the shore is still visible behind you, and you are not yet far enough out that the shore being there or not being there makes any practical difference. And there is something in your body that finds the shrinking coast reassuring in a way that has no strategic basis whatsoever. Your oar goes in at the angle it should, comes out clean without the air pocket that costs momentum, feathers on the recovery, enters again. The man in front of you, Eric's brother, his name is Arn, has a rhythm that is slightly faster than Gunnar's rhythm 3 benches forward, and the rhythm of the whole boat is the resolution between these competing, slightly different rhythms, which Rolf manages from the stern with periodic calls that everyone adjusts to without acknowledging. The water is grey. Green. The sky is grey. The distinction between them at the horizon is a matter of slightly different textures of grey, not of colour. The oar bench is 8 inches wide. This is not a complaint. This is a measurement. You know the measurement because you have spent enough time on this bench that your body has produced an opinion on 8 inches. and the opinion is that 8 inches is adequate for a man who is upright and active and using the bench as a pivot point for useful work, and it is inadequate for a man who is trying to sleep. And you have been both kinds of man on this bench, and the inadequacy is familiar. The space between your bench and the bench in front of you is approximately the length of the oar's recovery stroke, plus the small tolerance required for the man behind you not to take your elbow in his face at the catch. The space between the hull wall on your right and the man on your left is the space between the hull wall and the man on your left, which is to say there is no formula for it. It is simply whatever is left, after 63 men have been distributed along 26 meters of vessel in the arrangement that makes the rowing word. You are touching, when the boat rolls, the man to your left and the man behind you. This is not a social situation. This is the geometry of the thing. The ship is 26 meters long and 4 meters wide at the beam and draws approximately 70 centimeters of water when loaded, which is the number that explains everything. 70 centimeters. A child can wade in 70 centimeters. The deliberate achievement of this draft, this refusal of depth, required generations of accumulated shipbuilding knowledge. The specific technique of overlapping strakes, called clinker construction, that produced a hull both light and strong enough to flex with the sea rather than resist it. The careful calculation of how much keel was enough to track straight without adding the draft that would require deeper water to operate in. The men who built this ship were not primitive. They were specialists in a specific and demanding engineering problem, and the solution they arrived at was a vessel that could cross open ocean and also beach directly on a shore with no dock required. Which is to say, a vessel that could appear where no vessel was expected, because the shores that had no docks were the shores that had concluded. They did not need to prepare for maritime attack. Those shores were wrong. The ship made them wrong. The 70 centimeters of draft was the weapon. The wind comes in from the northwest around midday, and Rolf makes the call to step the mast. And the work of stepping the mast is the work of 63 men in a confined space, reorganizing themselves around a large object that needs to go from horizontal to vertical, which requires the men in the middle of the ship to move out of the way of the mast in a sequence, and then move back in a sequence. And the sequence is not elegant, but it is fast, because everyone knows it and has done it before, and speed matters more than elegance when the mast is going up and the wind is available. The sail goes up. The big square sail, wool, dyed with the pattern that Sigurd's ships use, which you do not look at for its aesthetics, but which your eye finds in the grey of the sky and registers as the confirmation that this particular part of the work is done. The oars come in. Your hands, which have been wrapped around the oar since the morning, release the oar, and what they feel is the absence of the oar, which presents as a kind of persistent phantom grip that will last for the rest of the afternoon. You flex your fingers. The wind takes the sail. The ship moves differently under sail than under oars. A different point of resistance, the hull sitting differently in the water, the sound of the sea against the strakes a different sound. You eat some of the dried meat from your bench chest. It is cold, and it is not good, and it is food, which is what it is for. Here is the arithmetic that precluded the horse completely, and finally beyond geometry, and beyond logistics, and beyond the question of what happens when you land and need to fight. A horse requires approximately 25 to 30 litres of water per Dalton Y in normal conditions, and 40 or more in conditions involving exertion or heat stress. A North Sea crossing in the 9th century, under reasonable conditions, took 2 to 4 days. A horse in the hold of a longship, if the hold existed, which it did not, if the hull depth allowed it, which it did not, would require between 50 and 120 litres of water for the crossing, which in a vessel where the total freshwater provision for 63 men was calculated to the barrel, and represented a significant portion of the cargo weight, would have been a logistical absurdity before you even addressed the horse's structural effect on a vessel with no structural margin to spare. And then there is the matter of the horse's behaviour. Horses do not float calmly. Horses in confined spaces in rough water produce the kind of panicked motion that, in a vessel with a 70 centimetre draft, would have effects that are not survivable by the horse or anyone near it. The Vikings knew this. The solution was not a horse that handled boats better. The solution was to get the horse at the other end. On the second night, the sea is difficult in the way that November sea is difficult, which is not catastrophic, but is sustained and requires your body to make continuous small adjustments to a platform that is continuously making decisions without consulting you. Your sleep is the thin sleep of a man on a moving platform in cold wind. The same sleep you slept in Mail before Hattin, though the reasons for the inadequacy are different, and the Mail is present here too, because where else would it be? You wake with salt in your beard and a neck that has spent the night in a posture that no neck endorses, and the particular stiffness of a body that has been both cold and damp for 24 hours. Around you, the boat is the boat. The same 63 men, the same grey water, the sounds of the sea and the sounds of men who are not talking, because there is nothing to say that the sea has not already said louder. On in front of you has the posture of a man who slept somewhat better than you did, which you track with the mild resentment of someone who has been awake since before. Dawn for reasons that are not his fault but are still somehow annoying. The sail is still up, the northwest wind held through the night. You have been moving east since yesterday morning, and east is where England is, and you are closer to it than you were, which is either good news or the other kind, depending on what you do with it when you arrive. The longship's military logic extended beyond the reach of its hull and into the entire operational concept it enabled. A Frankish force defending against Viking raids operated in a landscape of permanent disadvantage. They did not know where the ships would land. They could not move faster than the ships could move once in a river, and their intelligence network was only as fast as horses could carry information. The Viking force knew exactly where it was going and arrived there without warning and left the same way. The ship was not a vehicle for getting to the battle. The ship was the campaign, the operational flexibility that made every defended target vulnerable, because no defence could cover everywhere at once. Charles the Bold understood this eventually and built bridges across the Seine and the Loire with fortifications at each end, which was the correct response, which is to say it addressed the ship's advantage directly rather than defending the targets the ships were reaching. It worked, with significant caveats, and over a considerable period of time, and considerable violence. The caveats are the reason this chapter exists. By the third morning, you can smell England before you can see it. This sounds like something from a saga, and it is also accurate. The smell of land after 2 days at sea is not subtle. It is the smell of soil and vegetation, and the specific organic content of a coast that is not the open water you have been on, and your nose registers it before your eyes find the line of the shore. Men on the boat are sitting up straighter. The conversation, which has been minimal, picks up slightly. Not because there is more to say, but because the approach makes saying things feel different. Rolf is at the stern reading the coast as it appears, the shape of the headlands, the colour of the water, the birds, the drift of whatever is floating near the surface, with the eye of a man who has done this approach before on this coast, and is establishing position in reference to what he already knows. The oars come out again, the sail coming down as the water shallows, the rhythm picking up from the 2 days of sail, drift that have rested your arms, and from which your arms have drawn some recovery that they are about to be asked to spend. Your grip finds the oar finds the water. The shore is there. Ahead, green above the grey of the beach. There are no docks. This is the point. The landing is fast the way that rehearsed things are fast. Not fast because anyone is particularly hurrying, but fast because the sequence has been agreed on, and everyone's body knows its position in the sequence. And the hull touching the beach is the signal that starts it. The prow hits the shingle, and you are moving. Out of the bench, over the side, your boots in the water, and then your boots on the stones, and the weight of your gear settling onto you in the slightly different way. It settles when the platform is no longer moving. Around you the other men are coming out of the hull in the same sequence, and the hull is being pulled up the beach by the men at the bowlines, who are the men assigned to the bowlines. The beach is November grey. The trees above the shingle are the trees of a coast that did not expect anyone. Inland, somewhere above the tree line, there is smoke, the specific smoke of a settlement's morning fires, which is the smoke of a place that woke up today expecting an ordinary day. Your mail is wet at the hem from the landing. Your feet are cold. Your sword is at your belt. Rolf is already reading the tree line. Sigurd is standing at the waterline looking inland with the expression he had at the home beach 2 days ago. The inventory expression. Except now the thing he is taking inventory of is specific and close and answerable, in a way that futures are not. You are on the beach. You have arrived. This part of the operation is complete. The next part is about to begin. The horse is in Denmark. The shingle is louder than you remember, or you remember it differently than it is, which is the same situation from 2 different angles. Your boots find the stones, and the stones shift under your weight, with the specific sound of a beach that has never been asked to be quiet about anyone arriving. and you are aware that the beach is announcing you in the way that beaches announce everything, which is loudly and without discretion, and there is nothing to be done about this, because the beach is a beach. You are moving up the shingle toward the tree line with the rest of the men, and the speed of the movement is the speed Rolf called, which is not a run but is faster than a walk. The pace of men who have established that there is no immediate threat and are converting the time before a threat appears into distance and position. Your mail is still wet at the hem. Your breath is visible. The trees are the trees of the English East Coast in November, bare enough that you can see into them a reasonable distance. The undergrowth reduced by the season to a thing you can move through without it becoming an obstacle. You move through it, somewhere ahead, the smoke. Your hand is not on your sword yet, because your hand is not on your sword until it needs to be. But your hand knows where the sword is. The place you have landed is not chosen randomly. Rolf has been on this coast before, and the choice of this particular beach reflects knowledge accumulated across previous crossings. The depth of the approach, the shelf of the shingle, the gap in the trees that makes the initial inland movement possible without fighting the landscape before you fight anything else. The distance to the settlement, whose smoke you can see from the tree line, which is close enough to reach before the settlement has organized a response, and far enough from the beach that the beach approach was not observed by anyone in it. This is intelligence. Not the formal intelligence of a military organization with scouts and maps, but the accumulated operational knowledge of men who have done this specific kind of work on this specific coast, and retained what mattered. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records Viking raids on the East Anglian coast, in terms that make them sound like weather. They arrive, they take things, they leave. The chronicler moves on to the next entry. What the chronicle does not record is the operational planning that made the arrivals look like weather, the remembered coastlines, the tidal schedules, the knowledge of which settlements were worth the approach, and which ones had developed the kind of defensive preparation that changed the cost-benefit calculation. Here is the context that makes the year matter. This is 865, and what you are part of is not a standard raid. You do not know this yet. You know you are on a beach in England with 63 men, and a specific target, and a ship that is being camouflaged in the tree line by the 8 men assigned to the ship. But the broader situation is that the Danish and Norse raiding that has been happening on this coast for the better part of a century has been consolidating. The force that will winter in East Anglia this year, the one the Chronicle calls the Myselhachen here, the Great Heathen Army, is not 63 men. It is somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 men under a unified command, and its intention is not to raid and return, but to take land and stay. Your raid is its own thing, operating in the same season and the same geography, with its own chain of command and its own logic. But the East Anglians you are about to encounter are operating in the knowledge that this year is different from previous years, and that knowledge is making them different, and the difference will present itself to you in the next half hour in ways that require adjustment. You smell the settlement before you see it clearly. The fire smell, the animal smell, the specific combination that means people have been in one place long enough for the place to smell like them. Then you see it, a cluster of buildings behind a fence that is more boundary marker than defensive structure, the kind of fence that keeps animals in rather than enemies out. The kind of fence that was built by people who until recently had not needed the other kind. There are people moving in it. You can see them through the fence posts, the movement of ordinary morning. Someone carrying something between 2 buildings, the shape of an animal near the far end. Then the movement changes because one of the people moving in the settlement has seen the tree line, has seen what the tree line contains. And the kind of movement that person is now producing is not the movement of ordinary morning. Your feet are already moving faster. Around you the line is spreading in the way it spreads for an approach. Not running yet, closing distance, at the pace that covers ground without spending the breath you are going to need. Your shield is up. The fence is 40 yards. 30. What the settlement has, which you register at approximately 20 yards, is horses. Not many. You can see 3, 4, possibly 5 in the enclosure at the near end. But horses, which are the thing that changes what happens next, and also the thing that explains several things about the next several weeks that you do not yet know require explaining. The horses are not war horses. They are the working animals of a farming settlement, smaller than what a Frankish knight would ride, less trained, built for pulling rather than carrying an armoured man at speed. But they are horses, which means they have legs and can cover ground faster than your legs can cover ground, and the man who is currently on one of them and riding hard toward the far fence is demonstrating this point in real time. He is going to get away. You know this at 20 yards, and it is not a tactical problem you can solve in the time available. He goes, the fence is 10 yards. You go through the gap where the gate is or was. The operation takes the time that these operations take, which is less time than the people inside the fence expected, and more time than it feels like from your side. The resistance is the resistance available. Two men with tools that are not weapons, making the decision that tools can be weapons if the situation requires it, which is a decision you respect as a decision, while also addressing its practical consequences efficiently. Nobody on your side is hurt in a way that counts. The provisions, the dried fish, the grain stores in the covered pit, the smoked meat in the outbuilding, are the provisions of a settlement that has been storing for winter, which means they are more complete than they would have been in summer, which is one of the reasons November is a reasonable time to cross. You load what can be carried in the time available, and what loading time exists before the man who left on the horse comes back with whatever he comes back with, which could be nothing, or could be the local ferd. And the ferd is something you would prefer to be on the water by the time it arrives. Rolf is doing the time calculation in the way he always does. Not visibly, not by consulting anyone, but by moving through the space with the attention of a man who has a number in his head and is watching the number count down. The horses left behind, 3 of them, the ones who did not leave with the man who fled, are now the most important objects in the settlement, for a reason that has nothing to do with their value as transport animals, and everything to do with their value as transport animals. 63 men came off the ship. 63 men are going to have to operate inland for as long as the campaign requires operating inland. 63 men on foot cover ground, at the pace of 63 men on foot, which is adequate for operations, close to the beach, and increasingly inadequate as the distance from the beach grows. 3 horses do not solve this problem. 3 horses are the beginning of solving this problem, which is the Viking approach to horse acquisition. Not bringing horses across the water, but finding horses in the landscape you have landed in and incorporating them into the operational picture as they become available. Every settlement has horses. Every raid that progressed beyond the beach encountered horses. The great heathen army that wintered in East Anglia that winter would by the following spring have enough horses to move the bulk of its force across England at a pace that shocked the people watching it happen. They had not brought those horses from Denmark. They had found them here. You are back at the beach in less time than you expected, which is either because the operation went faster than planned, or because Rolf's internal count reached a number that ended the planning. The provisions are loaded. 3 horses are on leads, held by men who have dealt with horses enough to hold them without drama. The horses are nervous. The beach is not a context they know. The smell of 63 strange men is not a smell they enjoy, but they are on the leads, and they are moving, and they are going to be assets, rather than problems, if the next 30 minutes proceed without the ferd appearing on the headland to your north. The ship is already in the water, pushed off the shingle by the men who stayed with it, sitting in the shallow draw with the oars shipped. Loading a horse onto a longship is not a procedure with a long tradition of success, which Rolf addresses by not attempting it. The horses go with the 4 men who are staying in East Anglia as the advance element for the larger operation, which is a detail of the campaign structure that you learn at the waterline and file under things that explain certain aspects of how this all fits together. You did not know there was a larger operation. Now you do. Sigurd knew. Sigurd was Sigurd about it. Your oar is in the water before the shingle has fully released the hull. The rhythm picks up from where it left. The same catch, the same drive, the same recovery. And the shore begins to go backwards, in the same way the Danish shore went backwards 3 mornings ago, which is the visual experience of departure rendered in grey and brown. The settlement is inland now, invisible behind the tree line, present only as the smoke that is still rising in the same place it was rising when you were in it, and will be rising after you are out of sight, because fires do not stop burning, because the situation changed. The man on the horse, the one who fled, is somewhere to the north, with whatever news he is carrying, and whatever that news produces. It will not find you on this water. The water does not care about the news. Your oar goes in, and comes out, and the coast moves. Your hands are cold again, or still, it is not clear that they were ever not cold. And the grip is the grip you have had for 3 days on this crossing, and the new crossing is a shorter one, and then you are somewhere else. and the operation continues. Behind you, the East Anglian coast does what coasts do, which is sit there. Ahead of you, more coast, the same coast differently arranged, the next settlement smoke not yet visible. Your back is to Denmark, your horse is in Denmark. England is on all sides of you now, and this is fine because this is the plan. The horse under you is not your horse. You are aware of this in the specific way. You are aware of a tool that belongs to someone else. Not that you are going to give it back, but that its responses are not calibrated to you, and your responses are not calibrated to it. And the relationship between a rider and a horse is built on exactly the kind of accumulated mutual calibration that you do not have with this animal, and it does not have with you. It is a sturdy horse, adequate, not the kind of horse that a man with options would select, but the kind of horse that a man who found 3 horses on a beach in November is grateful to have. It moves under you with the slightly uncertain energy of an animal that has been removed from its known context and placed in an unknown one, and is making continuous small decisions about whether the unknown one is going to produce something that requires faster movement than the rider is currently asking for. You are asking for a trot. It gives you a trot. The communication between you is formal, rather than intuitive. The aids you apply are the aids your Danish horse understands, and this horse is reading them as close enough to its own vocabulary to respond. But the margin for misunderstanding is wider than you are used to, and the East Anglian landscape is moving past you on both sides, and there is no room to negotiate a disagreement. You and the horse have agreed, tentatively, and without discussion, to manage. Beside you, Gunnar is on the second horse, which is larger and quieter, and seems to have accepted the situation with the philosophical equanimity of an animal that has had several confusing things happen to it this morning, and has reached the limit of its capacity to find new things confusing. Gunnar rides the way Gunnar does everything, efficiently, without commentary, his weight in the right place, his hands quiet. Behind you, the main body of men is on foot, moving at the pace that 60 men on foot move through late autumn English landscape, which is not slow, but which is not the pace you are making. You are the advance. 3 horses, 3 riders, moving ahead of the main body to read the next mile before the main body arrives in it. The settlement pattern, the roads, the places where a larger defensive force could be positioned if the local lord has had time to organize one. Your job is not to engage anything. Your job is to return with information in time for Sigurd to use it. The horse is the tool that makes the job possible. The job could not be done on foot in the time available to do it. This is the conversion from crossing to raid to mounted operation that the Vikings performed at every landing that produced horses, and it is why the range of a Viking raid did not correlate in any straightforward way with the distance from the beach. The English landscape in late autumn has a quality that your Danish landscape does not, which is depth. Denmark is flat in the way that coastal land near water tends to be flat. The view is long and the sky is large, and the things that interrupt the horizon are chosen rather than imposed. East Anglia in November is a landscape of hedgerows and tree lines, and the slight rises of ground that are enough to conceal what is on the other side of them. And you move through it, reading the signs the way you read any landscape you are moving through with intent. The smoke patterns, the sound of animals, the state of the road, used recently, used by feet or by cartwheels, used by how many, the birds that lift when something has disturbed them from a direction you cannot yet see. Your horse's ears are doing work that your ears cannot do, tracking sounds in the forward arc that are not yet in your range, rotating toward things that register as significant before your own senses confirm them. You have learned to watch the ears. The ears went forward 40 minutes ago when you passed the first abandoned farmstead. Empty, recently emptied. The morning fire cold, but the embers not cold enough for yesterday. And the ears are currently doing something between neutral and alert that you are reading as probably nothing but possibly something, and you are choosing to treat as possibly something because the cost of treating nothing as something is lower than the cost of the alternative. The speed advantage that horses gave to Viking raiding parties on land was not a marginal improvement. It was the difference between a force that operated at walking pace, covering perhaps 15 to 20 miles in a day through unfamiliar territory while carrying gear, and a force that could cover 40 to 60 miles in the same time, arriving at its next target before the news of its previous one had travelled by the only available means, which was also walking pace. The Anglo-Saxon defensive system, the Fyrd, the local levies, the concept of the Shire organising itself to respond, was calibrated to the speed of information on foot and the speed of men gathering and marching. A Viking force that moved faster than the news of itself was operating outside the envelope of that defensive system. It was not that the system was bad, it was that the system was built for a different kind of threat, and was encountering a different kind of threat. And the adjustment took decades and produced Alfred the Great in the process, which is the kind of outcome that history produces when the existing institutions are insufficient, and someone competent is forced to build new ones from scratch. The first settlement you find that has horses is also the first settlement you find that has men in it preparing for you specifically. 3 men at the road entrance with spears and the look of men who have received the news, and have decided that the news requires a response, and whose response is currently positioned between admirable and insufficient. You come over the low rise at the trot, and see them at approximately the same moment they see you, which is enough time for both sides to make assessments. Their assessment of you is 3 riders, armed, moving fast, ahead of a larger force. Your assessment of them is 3 men, spears, no mail, no horses, the posture of determined farmers rather than trained fighters. You do not stop, you do not accelerate. You continue at the trot, which is the pace of someone who has made a calculation, and the calculation came out in their favour, and the 3 men read the calculation in your pace, and make their own calculation, and their calculation produces a gap in the road that your horse moves through without adjusting its stride. Gunnar does not look at them as he passes. This is more threatening than looking at them. You do not look at them either. Behind you, the gap closes. Nothing happens. This is the correct outcome. The horses in this settlement are in a paddock at the eastern end, 7 of them, and they are the horses of a settlement that has been on this road long enough to accumulate working stock. 2 heavy animals for field work, 3 riding horses in the middle range of quality, 2 younger ones, not yet fully in work. You count them from the road, and the count is what it is, and the decision is made before you have finished counting, because the decision was made when you saw the paddock. Your horse reads your intent before you apply the aid, the shift in your weight, the change in your direction, some signal in the way you are sitting that communicates that the ride has found its immediate purpose. And it turns toward the paddock without arguing. The 3 men with spears are behind you somewhere, and they are no longer the relevant factor. The horses in the paddock are the relevant factor. 7 horses means you have the beginning of something operational, rather than the beginning of something logistical. And the difference between those 2 things is the difference between a raiding party that covers 15 miles a day and a raiding party that covers 50. What the Great Heathen Army did in the winter of 865 to 866, while it was quartered in East Anglia, with the nominal permission of the East Anglian King Funtalbert, who had made the calculation that permission was preferable to the alternative, was acquire horses. The sources do not record this as a significant event, because the sources were written by people for whom horse ownership was ordinary, and the accumulation of horses by a large force was a logistical matter rather than a strategic revolution. The Annals of St. Neots notes almost in passing that the army was provided with horses by the East Anglians. The implication of this is that several thousand men who arrived on longships without horses departed the following spring with enough horses to move the army overland at a pace that covered the length of England in a single campaign season. York fell in November of 866, Nottingham in 867, Thetford in 869. The pace of these campaigns was only possible on horseback. The ships were pulled up on the beaches or left in rivers under guard, and the army moved on horses it had found in England, and England spent the next 2 centuries adjusting to the consequences of that mobility. You are back with the main body by early afternoon, the 7 horses on leads behind you, the 2 heavy field animals being led by men who are used to heavy field animals, and are managing the leads with the competence of farmers who understand what they are dealing with. Sigurd takes the count, the horses, the distance, the settlement pattern, the 3 men with spears, whose location you last observed behind you, the state of the road north. With the inventory attention, he gives all information, turning it into the updated picture that replaces the previous picture and determines the next decision. He looks at the horses for a longer moment than he looks at anything else. He nods once. You understand the nod as the acknowledgement of a situation that has changed in the useful direction. The operation has horses now. The operation has range now. The operation is a different operation than it was this morning on the beach. The men around you who have been walking since the landing are looking at the horses with the specific attention of men who are calculating which of them might end up on one. The calculation is not primarily about status, though status is in there, It is primarily about the next settlement and the distance to it, and the weight of the gear they have been carrying since the beach. The horse under you has stopped trying to find the edges of the agreement you reached this morning. 4 hours of riding the same rider through the same landscape has produced something that is not trust, but is in the same family as trust. The horse's responses are slightly faster now, slightly less considered. The small negotiations between you have simplified down to the ones that matter. It is not your horse. It will not be your horse. At the end of this campaign, it will be someone else's horse. Either because you sell it, or because you trade it, or because the campaign ends in a way that makes property relations moot. You have had this conversation with this horse's predecessor, and the one before that. Every horse you have ridden in England has been this horse. The temporary one, the one that belongs to the operation, and not to you. Your horse is in Denmark, on the East Field. If your nephew did what you told him, eating Danish grass and breathing Danish air, and being the horse, it is without any requirement to be useful to anyone until April or whenever you come back, whichever comes first. The horse under you walks north on an English road. Your horse stands in a Danish field. These are both true at the same time, and the distance between them is the distance the ship crossed, and the distance the raiders extended, and the distance that defines what you are, which is a man who is somewhere else with someone else's horse. Going further, you get off the horse 200 yards from the wall. This is not a dramatic moment, and it is not a difficult decision. It is the same decision that has always been made at this point in the sequence. The moment when the horse has done the thing the horse can do, and the next thing requires a different tool. Your feet find the ground, and the ground is solid under them, in the specific way that ground is solid after a morning on horseback, which is to say more solid than it needs to be, the impact of each step slightly more emphatic than your legs are prepared for. You loop the reins around the branch of the nearest suitable tree, a hazel, low enough, the knot you use that holds without binding, and the horse stands. It is breathing. It was working hard this morning, and its flanks still carry the warmth of that work. You put your hand on its neck for one moment, the horse's skin twitching under your palm, the way a horse's skin does when it acknowledges contact without requiring it. Then your shield is off your back and on your arm, and your spear is in your hand, and you are walking toward the 200 yards between you and the wall, and the horse is behind you, and the horse is going to stay behind you, because the next 200 yards are not the horse's problem. The wall ahead of you is not a wall in the sense of a structure built for permanent defense. It is the wall of the settlement's enclosure, timber posts, packed earth behind them in the places where whoever built it had time and understanding, a gate that has been reinforced with whatever was available, which was not enough. The people behind it know you are coming. They have known since the man on the horse left the first settlement. You have been aware of this since the first settlement, and it is a factor in the plan, not a surprise. What you have and they do not have is the organization to do something about it. 63 men who trained together on a cold field in October, who know the wall drill and the partner drill and the specific weight of a shield locked to the shield next to it, versus the number of people behind a timber enclosure who are capable of holding a weapon and willing to hold it. The capable and willing number is not 0. It is also not 63, with mail and shields, and 3 years of drilling with Gunnar. You close the gap between the observation and the analysis, and the gap closes to about 100 yards before the sound from behind the wall tells you that they have decided to make the analysis yours to confirm, rather than theirs to revise. The first spears come over the wall at range. Not well, aimed, not powerful enough to be a serious threat at the distance they are thrown from, but present and requiring acknowledgement. Your shield comes up. The spear that would have been relevant to you hits the boss and deflects at the angle that physics requires, and you feel the impact in your forearm and shoulder, and both have opinions about the impact that you file for later. The wall is 70 yards. You are walking, not running, because running uses the breath you need for the next part and arrives you at the wall ahead of the men beside you. And arriving at the wall ahead of the men beside you is the thing that Gunnar spent 3 hours in October making clear you should not do. Gunnar is to your left. His shield is locked to yours. Eric is to Gunnar's left. The line is the line, and you are in it, and the line is moving. And 70 yards is 50 yards, and you are aware of the specific quality of attention your body produces in this interval, which is not calm and is not panic, but is the focused version of both. Every sound is loud. Every piece of information your eyes produce is in the foreground. Your shoulder is not bothering you at all, because the part of your body that was tracking your shoulder has temporarily suspended, that service in favour of more pressing operational requirements. The Viking approach to land combat, when the horses had done their work and the distance had closed to the point where the work changed, was the shield. All that Chapter 3 described from the training field in October. The same formation, the same logic, deployed now against people who were also defending behind a structure rather than standing in an open field. The distinction matters. A defended position changes the geometry. You are not meeting an opposing shield wall, you are breaching an enclosure, which is a different problem with different requirements. The problem of breaching an enclosure comes down to making a gap, or using an existing gap. The gate, ideally, and moving enough men through the gap quickly enough that the defence cannot concentrate on the gap faster than men are coming through it. The Franks had developed elaborate siege machinery for this problem. The Vikings developed a different solution, which was to move fast enough that the defence had not yet organised into something that required elaborate machinery to defeat. Speed was the machinery. The horse had provided the speed. The horse was now in the trees, and the speed had been converted into the tactical situation, and the tactical situation required the shield, and the spear, and the organised line, and not a horse. The gate is the gate, and then it is not the gate. It comes apart in the way that gates come apart, when the men hitting it have the weight and the organisation, and the gate does not have the reinforcement to match. You go through it in the sequence that going through a gate requires, which is single file and fast, and with the specific vulnerability of a man who is in a gap rather than a line, and who is aware that the gap is where the defence concentrates its attention. Your shield is high, your spear is short, because the gate is narrow. Something hits your shield from the right, and you push back toward it without seeing what it is, the push reflexive rather than considered. And you are through, and your feet are finding the ground inside the wall, and the men behind you are filling the space, and the line is reforming inside the gate, in the way it is supposed to form. Gunnar's voice, giving the call, the shields locking again. The wall inside the wall. There are people in this enclosure. Some of them are going to negotiate with this situation, and some of them are not, and the next several minutes will be the process of determining which is which. The fight inside the enclosure is the fight inside an enclosure, which is not the fight of the open field and not the fight of the saga. It is close, loud, shorter than it feels, and resolved by the asymmetry of the situation, rather than by individual skill or narrative satisfaction. Your spear is useful for about 40 seconds before the space is too confined for it, and you shift to the seeks, which is the weapon for this distance, the weapon that does not require the arm's length that the spear requires. Your elbow is somewhere it should not be, and then it is somewhere it should be, and the arrangement of bodies in the space is changing, and the change is in the direction that 63 men with mail and training produce. You are breathing through your mouth. You have been breathing through your mouth since the gate. The sound inside the enclosure is the sound of this kind of work. Not quiet, not the ringing heroism of the vocabulary, but the sound of bodies and equipment in close contact, and the human response to the proximity of acute danger, which is not dignified, but is accurate. Gunnar is to your left. You know this without looking. You have been training with him for 3 years, and your body knows where he is, the way your body knows where your own arm is. The pause, when it comes, is not a conclusion. It is a change in the kind of activity required. The people who were going to negotiate have negotiated, and the people who were not are not. The enclosure is yours in the sense that you are in it, and standing, and the relevant question has been answered. Your breath is coming in the way your breath comes after this kind of work. Faster than normal, the specific character of deep exertion. A kind that will not normalize for several minutes, regardless of whether you want it to. Your seeks is in your hand, and you are making the inventory that this moment requires, which is rapid and practical. Your own condition, the condition of the men around you, the condition of the enclosure, the condition of the things in the enclosure that are relevant to the operation's purpose. Rolf is already moving through the space, doing the same inventory faster, and with more authority, because Rolf's inventory is the one that becomes the list. The operational purpose of the campaign is the thing that Rolf is inventorying. The grain, the silver, the portable valuables that a settlement of this size accumulates and stores. The livestock that can be moved, and you are part of the inventory, in the sense that your hands are part of the work of moving things from their current location to the location Rolf designates. This is the work after the work, which is less dramatic and more uncomfortable than the work itself, because your body is running on the residue of the adrenaline that the gate required, and the residue is not energizing, It is depleting. And you are lifting grain sacks and moving livestock and doing the things that need doing in the cold November afternoon with the specific flatness that the residue produces. Your shoulder has resumed its conversation from October. It has a lot to say. You load what you load. The horse is where you left it, the knot held. It has been standing in the same position for the time the enclosure took, approximately one ear forward and one ear back, the posture of an animal that is aware that something was happening within earshot and has made the assessment that the something did not require the animal to do anything about it. You untie the reins. Your hands are cold, and the knot has tightened slightly, and it takes a moment longer than you want it to. The horse does not comment on the delay. You get on. The horse is warm, the warmth of an animal that has been standing in a cold field for an hour, which is less warm than an animal that has been working, but is warm where your legs meet its sides, and your legs accept the warmth with the gratitude of legs that have been cold since the beach. Around you men are mounting or loading the pack animals, or organising the LED livestock, the operation converting back from the static phase into the mobile phase. Sigurd at the front of the group, with the inventory expression, aimed down the road north. The enclosure is behind you. The smoke from the settlement's fires is still rising in the way that smoke rises regardless of what has happened around it. Patient, vertical in the still air, doing the thing that fire does without reference to anything else. Your horse walks north. You are on it. The gate you came through is behind you. The wall you came through is behind you. And the horse that got you here carried you through none of it. And none of it required the horse. And the horse is what gets you to the next one. 3 weeks into the campaign you have more horses than you can usefully manage, which is a problem that requires a specific kind of attention that is different from the attention the horses required when you had 3 of them. The count this morning is 47, which includes the ones from the eastern settlements and the ones acquired during the push north and the 12 that came with the Mercian tribute that Sigurd negotiated at the river crossing. Negotiated being the word that Sigurd uses, and that Rolf records in the tally, and that accurately describes a conversation conducted at the edge of a ford with 60 armed men visible behind the negotiating party. 47 horses require 47 horses worth of forage per Dalton Yoi, which at this time of year means the late season grass of whatever field you are camping adjacent to, and the hay stores of whatever settlement provided or did not volunteer the hay stores. And it means someone has to manage the 47 horses while the men who are not managing the 47 horses are doing the other things that need doing. Your horse from the first settlement, the sturdy one, the tentative agreement, is one of the 47. You have stopped thinking of it as the horse from the first settlement. You have started thinking of it as the horse, which is the cognitive shorthand of someone who has been riding the same animal for 3 weeks and whose body has completed enough of the calibration process that the shorthand is accurate. The horses have sorted themselves into a loose hierarchy in the way that horses in a group always sort themselves, which is according to criteria your eye can track, even if the full logic escapes you. Age, size, confidence, whatever combination of factors a horse reads in another horse that determines which one moves away from the water first and which one moves toward the water last. Your horse is in the middle of this hierarchy, which is where working horses tend to be. Not the one that the others defer to and not the one that the others push around, but the horse that manages its relationships in the herd with the efficiency of an animal that understands the social cost of ambition and the social cost of weakness and has landed on the position that costs least. You watch them in the early morning, before the camp wakes enough to require your attention, because watching them is the thing you do when the thing you should be doing is sleeping, and you have discovered that 3 weeks of campaign sleep has produced a relationship with sleeping that is more complicated than you would like. The horses are dark shapes in the pre-dawn, breathing in the cold air, their breath visible. You have been watching this particular display, horse breath in cold morning air, since October on the Danish farm, and it looks the same here, and the sameness is either comforting or disorienting depending on the morning. The question of what happens to 47 horses at the end of the campaign is not a question you are responsible for answering, but it is a question whose answer will affect your share of the settlement, so you have an interest in how Rolf answers it. Rolf's answer involves several categories. The horses that are worth taking, the ones with the confirmation and the training that make them valuable in the specific market where you will be selling, will go on the ship, not the long ship, which is still the long ship, and still has the same 70 centimetre draft it had when you crossed. The cargo ship. The now that Sigurd has waiting at the river mouth is a different vessel from the longship. Deeper, slower, wider, designed for moving goods rather than moving men quickly. And the now can take horses in a way that the longship cannot. 2 or 3 in the hold with the grain sacks and the silver and the other portable wealth, provided the horses are the right size and temperament, and provided the North Sea cooperates at the right time, which it will or it will not, and the decision about which horses go on the Nair has to be made before you know which one is true. The Norse and Danish raiding economy was not purely about taking and leaving. By the mid-9th century it had developed a secondary layer of complexity that the simple narrative of raid and return does not capture: the negotiated tribute, the protection payment, the arrangement where the raiding party accepted silver or goods in exchange for moving on without further damage, and the re-raiding of settlements that had already paid and would pay again because the alternative was worse. Horses fit into this economy at multiple points. They were tribute. A jarl receiving a horse settlement was receiving a portable, useful, demonstrably valuable asset. They were currency. In the absence of sufficient silver, horses could settle accounts between parties, and they were operational capital, a force that arrived with no horses, and departed with 47 of them, had extended its capacity for future operations in a way that silver did not directly provide. The Frankish term for the tribute payment was danagild, though that specific term comes later. The concept, paying armed men to go away, was already operational in the 860s, and the horses were part of the arithmetic. The 7 horses that will not make any ship are the 7 horses that the campaign has used up. This is not a sentimental category. 2 of them are lame, 1 from a stone bruise on the left, 4 that did not resolve with rest, 1 from a fall on the Mercian road that produced a swelling that has gone down. But not enough, and the other 5 are simply the horses at the bottom of the distribution, the animals that were inadequate before the campaign and are more inadequate after it, whose weight has come off in the way that a working animal's weight comes off over 3 weeks of heavy use on variable forage, whose remaining utility does not justify their freight or their care. Rolf marks them in the tally. Their disposition follows. Your horse is not in this category, which you noted at the morning count, and which produced in you a response that you are not going to examine closely, because the response is the response of a man who has been riding the same horse for 3 weeks, which is the response that forms over 3 weeks of riding the same horse. And examining it does not change either the horse's disposition or the operational arithmetic. The work of reducing 47 horses to a manageable number for the return, for the Nar, for the men who are taking the overland route to the coastal pickup point, for the ones that Sigurd has already spoken to the local lord about leaving in exchange for the right to use the ford without incident on the way back, takes 2 days and involves more discussion than most of the actual fighting did. This is consistent with your experience of military operations, which is that the fighting takes the time the fighting takes, and the accounting takes longer. Rolf and Sigurd in conversation about the horses have the specific quality of 2 men who agree on the goal and disagree on the method, conducted in the vocabulary of men who have been disagreeing on methods for 15 years and have developed an efficient protocol for it. The protocol produces a result. The result is 9 horses on the Nair, 21 horses with the overland group, 8 horses left with the local lord in the ford arrangement, and 9 horses whose disposition has been resolved in the way the 7 were resolved. Your horse is in the 21 for the overland route, which means your horse is also your transport for the next 4 days of riding to the coastal point, which means you and the horse have 4 more days to complete the calibration that 3 weeks has started. The overland ride to the coast is the inverse of the ride inland, in a way that is not symmetrical, but feels like it should be. You are moving in the same landscape, the same hedgerows, the same bare trees, the same quality of East Anglian winter light, but moving toward the water rather than away from it, and moving with the weight of the campaign behind you rather than the weight of the campaign ahead of you, and these are different weights that sit differently in the body. The horse moves well. The 3 weeks and the 4 days have completed the calibration. Your weight shifts, and the horse responds with the speed your body expects. The communication is close to the communication with your Danish horse, in the sense that it happens without deliberation, which is what calibration means. You have stopped noting the differences and started noting the similarities. This is also what 3 weeks on the same horse means, and it is something you are aware of without having a protocol for it. because the protocol for it is the protocol you're applying, which is to ride the horse to the coast and get on the ship and leave the horse at the coast with the men who are staying for the second phase. You arrive at the coastal camp in the late afternoon of the 4th day, with the 21 horses and the 18 men and the provisions that the overland group was responsible for carrying. The Nar is already at anchor in the small bay. You can see it from the headland before you descend to the beach, the broader, deeper profile of it, distinct from the long ship shape you have been travelling on. The hull sitting lower in the water with what it is carrying. The long ship is beached on the shingle, familiar. The camp at the waterline has the quality of a late campaign camp, which is comfortable in its established way and tired in the specific way of men who have been doing this for several weeks and are now close enough to the end to feel the closeness. Sigurd is at the waterline again, the inventory expression, the count coming in from all directions, the overland group, the Nar, the long ship, the men and horses and goods that constitute the operation's result, and Sigurd resolving the count into the picture that determines what gets loaded in what order. You walk your horse down to the water. The water is there, the way water is always there, grey, green, doing nothing that requires acknowledgement. Your horse walks to the edge of it and stops and looks at it with the attention horses give to water. The assessment of whether the water is the kind of water that requires entering or the kind that can be observed from a distance, and concludes it is the latter, which is correct. You get off. You stand beside the horse for a moment with the reins in your hand, and the horse beside you and the sea in front of you, and the November light going the way November light goes in the late afternoon, which is quickly and without ceremony. Your hands know this horse now. Your legs know this horse. 3 weeks and 4 days of knowing, and tomorrow you are going to loop the reins around a post and walk to the waterline and get on the long ship. And this horse is going to watch you go, the way your Danish horse watched you go from the beach in October. The same attentive, uninvested observation, the same presence without participation. You loop the reins around the post. The horse looks at the sea. The sea looks at nothing. You go to the waterline. The ship is there. The ship has always been the point. You are home in December, and the homecoming is the homecoming your farm, your paddock, your nephew at the fence, with the expression of a 12-year-old who has been responsible for something important for 2 months, and has not destroyed it, and is aware of this, and would like you to be aware of it too. Your horse is at the far end of the east field, which is where you told him to keep it, which means the boy did what you told him, which you note without making a large thing of it, because making a large thing of it would suggest that you expected him not to, which is not a message you want to send. The horse comes to the fence when you approach it. This is what your horse does. It moves toward you from whatever distance it is at when you appear. Not because it has been trained to come to the fence, but because 3 years of you appearing at the fence with food, or with a ride, or with simply your hand on its nose have established that your appearance at the fence is a thing worth moving toward. The horse puts its nose into your palm. The push is the push you have been carrying in your hand memory since October. The cold is the cold of a Danish December, which is the cold you know. You are back. The horse is where you left it. These are the 2 facts that matter most right now, and they are both true. The news that Halfdan's horse is going into the ground with him reaches you 3 days after you return, which is 3 days after Halfdan himself reached the ground, which happened while you were on the Nar between England and the Danish coast. Halfdan was 61, and had been raiding since before you were born, and had accumulated the kind of reputation that people preserve carefully, because it is more useful than the man it is attached to. Not that Halfdan was not useful, but that Halfdan's usefulness had been receding for several years in the specific way that an older warrior's usefulness recedes, which is gradually enough that no single season makes the change obvious, and suddenly enough that his absence from the spring campaign was already being discussed, before anyone had reason to discuss it. He died in his longhouse, not on a field, or a beach, or in the water, which is the way most men die regardless of what the sagas suggest. And he died in the specific way of a man whose body has been running on the credit of a hard life for several years, and has decided to close the account. His horse, a grey, 15 years old, the animal he has ridden for the last decade of his riding, will go into the mound with him. This is the correct thing. Everyone agrees. It is the correct thing. The horse has been with him long enough that sending it into the ground with him is not a symbolic gesture so much as a practical acknowledgement of a relationship that was real and is now complete. The burial of horses with warriors was not a Viking invention, and it was not a Viking specialty, but the Norse practice of it was sufficiently consistent and sufficiently documented in the archaeological record that the relationship between a warrior and his horse at the moment of burial tells you something about the relationship between a warrior and his horse. Life, which is to say, it tells you the horse was understood to be a companion and a marker of status, and a thing worth preserving in the record of a man's life, even after the man's life was over. The Oseberg ship burial, excavated in Norway, contained 2 horses. The Gokstad ship burial contained 12. These were not random inclusions. They were deliberate statements about the identity and status of the person being buried, made in the vocabulary that the living understood, and that they intended the dead to have access to on the other side of whatever the other side was. The horse went with the warrior because the horse was part of who the warrior was, and the horse went with the warrior to his grave, into the mound, into the final stillness. And never once, in any of the campaigns that warrior had conducted in his living years, had the horse gone with the warrior to the battle. The mound is built on the ridge above Halfdan's farm, which is the ridge where the previous generation's mounds already are. His father's mound, his uncle's, the older one at the far end that no one alive can name with certainty. The community comes out for the building in the way that communities come out for the building, which is with the awareness that this is the work that defines what the community is and means and owes to its dead. You are there with your spade and your back. The grey horse is there, standing at the edge of the activity with the passive attention of a horse that is present in a context it does not understand, led by one of Halfdan's sons, who is holding the reins with the expression of a man who has been given a task and is performing it correctly, and whose face is doing what faces do when the task is correct, and the occasion is what it is. You do not look at the horse for long. You look at the work, which is the earth, which is what the occasion requires. The specific irony that your mind produces while your back is producing work is this. Halfdan rode to every muster you can remember him attending. He rode to the beach. He handed his horse to whoever was holding horses. He got on the ship. He fought. He came back. He rode home. The horse was present for all of it. The departure, the return, and absent from the middle, which was the part that made him who he was. And now the horse is going into the ground with him, permanent, inseparable, the final record of his life, in the form of the thing that was most consistently there, and most consistently uninvolved. The horse will be in the mound forever. The shield, wall will not be in the mound. The ship will not be in the mound. The specific cold of a North Sea crossing, and the specific weight of a shield locked to the shield next to it, and the specific sound of a gate coming apart under 60 men. None of that fits in the mound. The horse fits in the mound. The horse was always going to fit in the mound. You move the earth. Your back has opinions. The grey horse stands at the edge of the occasion and waits to be called forward, patient in the specific way that horses are patient, which is the way of a thing that does not know what it is waiting for, but has concluded that waiting is the correct posture. Your horse is in the paddock. You can see the paddock from the ridge. If you look, the fence line, the field, the shape of the animal at the far end. It is too far to see clearly but close enough to locate the dark shape on the pale winter grass. Your horse is not going into any mound today, which is good, and is not going into any mound for years if the arithmetic of horse lifespans runs normally, which it usually does. But the horse will go into something eventually, the mound or the ground or the disposal that circumstances require, and when it does, the thing it will not be remembered for is the thing that a warrior's horse is always not remembered for, which is the fighting. It will be remembered as the horse, as the companion, as the animal that was there, which is the record. The grey horse is now going to carry into the mound with Halfdan. That record is true. The horse was there. The horse was always there. The horse carried him to every beach and stood at every fence and watched every departure and every return and was present for the whole of it and a part of almost none of it. And now the horse will go into the dark with him, and the record says they were together. The record is right. The record is also incomplete. The record is always incomplete. It is April again. You know it is April again because your body knows it is April again. The specific quality of light on the Danish coast when the winter light has finally decided to become something else. The ground under your horse's feet no longer frozen, but not yet fully soft. The air with the edge still in it, but the edge going. You are riding south on the road that runs along the ridge, the road that takes you toward the muster point where Sigurd's ship is being prepared, and where the men are already gathering in the way they gathered last October. The same assessment of equipment, and the same conversations about equipment, and the same conversations around the conversations that nobody is having directly. Your horse is under you, and it is April, and you are on it. And this sequence. The horse, April, the ride south, has a rhythm that your body recognizes as the rhythm of departure, which is different from other rhythms your body knows. The wall appears on your left when you crest the second ridge. The Danevirk. You have ridden past it since you were old enough to ride past it, which means you stopped registering it the way you stopped registering the paddock fence or the longhouse door. It is simply there, the feature of the landscape that you locate automatically, and do not examine unless someone is examining it in front of you. But you are thinking today, on this April ride, about horses, and about what horses are for, and the wall presents itself to that thinking in a way it has not presented itself before. The Danevirk is an earthwork, a raised bank of soil and turf, reinforced in places with timber, stretching across the neck of the Jutland Peninsula, from the west coast marshes to the east coast waterway, in a line that is not perfectly straight but is relentlessly purposeful. It is not a castle, it is not a fort. It is a wall across a peninsula, and the thing it is across the peninsula to stop is cavalry. The Danevirk was not built in a day and was not built by one king. It had been added to and extended and reinforced across multiple reigns. The project of successive Danish rulers who looked south at the Frankish Empire, expanding under Charlemagne and his successors, and identified the specific threat that Frankish military power represented, which was cavalry. Frankish heavy cavalry, the mounted knights in their mail, on their destriers, with their high saddles and their stirrups, and their generations of specific breeding and training, was the arm that had made the Carolingian Empire what it was. It had pushed east into Saxony, south into Italy, west into Iberia. It moved at the pace of horses across the flat European interior, with a force and coherence that foot soldiers could not match in the open field. The Danes looked at this and built a wall, not because they could not understand cavalry. They raided Frankish territory regularly, and they saw Frankish cavalry operate, and they understood exactly what it was. Because the wall was the correct answer to the specific problem, which was, how do you stop cavalry from doing the thing cavalry does, which is move quickly across flat ground? The answer is, you put something across the flat ground that cavalry cannot move quickly through. The wall is the answer. The wall worked. Here is the thing about the wall that your April ride is making obvious, in the way that rides make things obvious. The Vikings built a wall to stop Frankish cavalry, and the Franks built bridges to stop Viking ships. Each side identified the other's actual military advantage and built a specific physical countermeasure to it. Neither side adopted the other's approach. The Franks did not build longships. The Vikings did not build cavalry armies. 2 centuries of contact, conflict, raiding, counter-raiding, and neither side concluded that the solution was to become the other side. The solution was always to build the thing that stopped the other side's solution. This is either a lesson in military conservatism or a lesson in military intelligence, depending on which century you are writing from. From where you are sitting, on a horse in April on a ridge above the Danevirk, it is simply the way things are. The wall is on your left, the road to the coast is ahead of you, and the thing you are riding toward is a beach and a ship and an absence of horses that begins the moment you hand the reins to someone. The Franks got Charlemagne, the Saxons got Alfred, the Vikings got the Danevirk and the longship and the operational logic of a people who had looked at the continent's military technology and made a considered choice about which parts of it applied to them and which parts did not. The horse was one of the parts that did not because the Vikings did not understand horses or value horses or ride horses, but because the horse was not the answer to the problem the Vikings were solving. The problem was movement at scale across water to targets that were not defended against water-based attack. The longship solved that problem. The horse made the solution work on land once you got there, in the way a cart horse makes a journey work. Once you are off the ship, useful, necessary for the overland part, irrelevant to the thing that defined the operation. You built the wall to stop their horses. You built the ship to be somewhere their horses couldn't follow. Both things are true. Both things worked. Your horse is carrying you south toward the beach, where it will stop being useful to this particular sequence of events. The same beach it stopped being useful at last October. The same fence post. The same looped reins. Sigurd is at the beach when you arrive. The ship is in the water. The men are there. Gunnar, Eric, the inconsistent men from the eastern farms who are consistent this April. The new ones replacing the ones who are not coming back for the various reasons that produce not coming back. Your mail is on your back. Your shield is on your back. Your spear is in your hand. You ride down to the waterline, and the horse's hooves hit the shingle with the sound that horse hooves on shingle make, which is the sound of this moment, the sound of the boundary between the horse part of the operation and the ship part of the operation. The sound is the same as last October. Octobers and Aprils have been producing this sound on this beach for long enough that the shingle knows it. Your nephew is not here this time. He is old enough for other responsibilities now. And someone else is holding horses this year. A younger boy, someone else's nephew. You get off. You hand the reins to the boy. The horse stands. You walk to the water. The ship is ready. The men are at the oars. The sea is the April sea, which is not the November sea. It is still cold. It is still grey. But it has a different quality to it, an openness that the winter sea does not have, as if the water itself has returned from somewhere and is willing to be crossed again. You find your bench. Your oar is there. Your hands close on it with the familiar grip of a thing done enough times to be automatic. And the ship moves away from the shingle with the sound of oars in water and the sound of the hull releasing from the gravel. And the coast goes the way the coast goes. The Dannevirke is somewhere north of you on its ridge, doing what it has always done, which is sit across the peninsula and be a wall. Your horse is at the fence, or it will be at the fence when the boy walks it back, doing what your horse has always done, which is stand at the fence and watch and wait. The wall stops cavalry on the land. The ship moves on the water. The horse stands at the fence. These are the arrangements that have been made, and they are good arrangements, and they are working, and you are on the ship, and the oar is in your hands, and the sea is ahead of you, and England is east, and you are going east, and the horse is at the fence, and the fence is north, and the wall is north, and everything is where it belongs. The night crossing is different from the day crossing, in the way that night is different from day, which is to say completely, and also in specific ways that your body has learned to distinguish across enough crossings, that the distinction is now part of the vocabulary your body speaks without consulting you. The darkness is the darkness of open water at night, with no moon yet. Not the darkness of a room or a longhouse, not the darkness with walls, but the darkness of a space that has no edges in any direction you can identify. The sea is out there, and you know it is out there because the oar is in it, and the resistance of the water is in your hands, and the sound of the hull moving through it is under you. But your eyes have stopped contributing to your understanding of the situation, and your other senses have redistributed the work accordingly. The cold is the April cold, which is less than November, but still present, still finding the gap at your collar, still working on the back of your hands where they grip the oar, still making itself felt in the space between your body heat and your clothing with the patient persistence of cold at sea, which does not hurry. Your oar goes in, your oar comes out. The ship moves east. The darkness moves with it, attached, indifferent. The rhythm of the oar at night, when the eyes have nothing to do, takes on a quality it does not have in daylight. In daylight, the oar is one of many inputs: the coast, the other men, the condition of the sea, the direction of the wind, the position of Rolf at the stern, the small adjustments that a crossing requires from the eyes and the mind that direct them. At night, the oar is most of what there is. The catch, the drive, the extraction, the feather, the recovery. The sequence is the sequence you have done enough times that your body runs it without supervision, and without the supervision your mind drifts to the place that minds drift to when the body is occupied and the eyes are not. You are thinking about the farm without deciding to think about the farm. The longhouse, the paddock fence, the east field. The specific way the light falls on the east field in the early morning when the mist is still on it. Your hands are on the oar. The oar is in the water, your mind is on the east field. Approximately. The Sea of Galilee was unreachable. The Frankish cavalry could not cross the North Sea. The Dannevirke sat on its ridge and stopped the things it was built to stop. Every military system in the history of the world has had the thing it could not do, the geography it could not cross, the problem it was not designed for. The Vikings could cross the water, and they could move on land, and they could fight the fight of the shield. Well, and they could not, in the end, do all of these things simultaneously on the same horse. The horse was the thing that got them to the water. The horse was the thing they found on the other side. The horse was never the thing in the middle. The middle was the ship and the oar and the cold and the dark and the 63 men breathing in the April night above an invisible sea, going east because east is where the work is, because east is where it has always been, because the ship goes where the ship goes and the horse goes where the horse goes, and these are different places that connect at the beach and diverge again. and the connection is the whole of it. And the divergence is the whole of it too. You stop thinking. This is not a decision. It is the thing that happens when the oar has been going in and out for long enough, and the eyes have had nothing to do for long enough, and the cold has become familiar enough to stop registering as new information. Your hands are on the oar is in the water. The water is doing what water does in the dark, which is be there, cold and present, and indifferent to your crossing of it. Indifferent to every crossing that has ever happened across its surface. Indifferent to what you found on the other side of it, and what you are bringing back and what you will do with what you are bringing back. The stars are out somewhere above the overcast. You know this because the overcast is not complete. There are breaks in it, and through the breaks there is the deeper dark of sky with stars rather than the paler dark of sky with clouds. You can see the break above you if you tip your head back, which you do. Briefly, your hand still on the oar still in the water. The break is there. The stars are there. The sky is very large. The farm is north. You know this in the way you know directions at sea, which is the way you know everything at sea. By the position of things you cannot currently see in relation to the direction you are moving, which is east, which means north is to your left, which means the farm is off your left shoulder, behind you now, further behind you with every stroke. Your horse is at the fence, or it is in the field, or it is in the paddock, wherever the boy put it, wherever it has moved in the night, doing what horses do in the dark, which is stand or move slowly, or drink from the trough in the corner of the paddock that you repaired in January, and which holds water properly now. The horse does not know you are on this ship. The horse does not know what a ship is in the way that your knowing extends to ships. The horse knows the farm and the field and the fence and the hand that appears at the fence and the grain and the cold and the season changing. It knows you in the way that horses know people, by the specific shape of your presence, the specific smell of you, the specific way you move, and the specific weight you put on its back, and the specific quality of your hands on the reins. It is waiting for that specific presence to return to the fence, the way it has always waited, the way it waited in October, and waited through the winter, and waited while you were building Halfdan's mound on the ridge, and is waiting now while you are on this water, in this dark. The oar goes in, the oar comes out, the ship moves. The sound of the water against the hull is the same sound it has been for hours, the same sound it was on every crossing, the same sound it will be on the crossing back. The cold is the cold, the dark is the dark. You are awake, and then you are less awake, and the transition is not a thing you can locate precisely. It is the way that the night and the rhythm and the cold and the work produce a state in a body that has been working since April morning. A state that is not sleep because you are upright on a bench with an oar in your hands, but is not full waking either, is the third thing. The in-between thing, the state where the oar is going in and out, and your hands are doing the work that your hands know how to do, and your mind is somewhere on the east field in the early morning, with the mist on it and the horse, at the far end of it, dark shape on pale grass, breathing visible in the cold. The horse is not doing anything. The horse is being the horse, which is what the horse does when there is nothing else required of it. Standing in the field, breathing, present, waiting for the fence, and the hand and the push into the palm. That means the person has come back. The oar goes in. The east field is quiet. The mist is on it. The horse is at the far end. You're almost there. Not there. Not yet. Still on the water. Still east. Still the crossing. But the field is in your hands, the way the oar is in your hands, both present, both real. The crossing and the field, and the dark water, and the pale grass, and the sound of the hull, and the sound of nothing, on a cold morning when nothing is required, and the horse is breathing, and you are almost home, and the oar is home. Goes in and the field is there, and your hands know the way, and the horse is at the fence, and the fence is north, and you are going, and the water is dark, and the horse is breathing, and the field is quiet, and the mist is on it, and you are almost, and the oar and the horse and the field, and the water and the cold and the dark, and the horse is there, and the mist is there, and you are going, and you are going. Going, and the oar goes in, and the field is quiet, and the horse is at the fence, and you are almost home.